Today, the three panelists will kind of unpack these. Part of the reason why they were carefully selected is because they have been part of this conversation in their different forums. We are going to have Ambassador Alie Kabba from Sierra Leone, Dr. Richard Ponzio, as well as Professor Martin S. Edwards. I will introduce them in much more detail, and they would come in and have this conversation in the order in which they have been called. Ambassador Alie, let me briefly give you his background. He's from Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone has been one of the advocates for the global, for a much more reformed UN Security Council. And Ambassador Alie was part of that conversation. Ambassador Alie has served as Sierra Leone's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and he is a permanent representative and also a permanent representative to the United Nations here in New York. In both capacities, the ambassador was unequivocal, and he was very consistent in advocating for the common African position on reform of the United Nations Security Council, as it was enshrined in the Ezulwini Consensus and the Satire Declaration, in order to correct what he calls the historical injustice done to Africa. He is the recipient of several awards in recognition of his distinguished leadership roles in multiple civic arenas. His multidisciplinary background in history, he has a multidisciplinary background in history, in philosophy, in political science, and in public policy analysis, which have shaped his strategic thinking and direction throughout his career in public service. So we are going to be very honored, Ambassador, to welcome you here. And I know I'm going to put you on the spot by asking you to be the first person to make a presentation here. All of you are going to have, I'm pretty sure has been communicated now, 8 minutes to make your presentation. The idea is to have our audience to actually be able to participate and ask you questions that they came in here with. So with that, and hopefully with nothing much ado, I would pass on the mic to Ambassador Alie, whom I have a lot of respect for, to start this conversation, and then we can kick off from there. Ambassador, next to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I want to, at the outset, thank the Africa Faith and Justice Network for this invitation. It's always a pleasure to engage with US-based African advocacy groups here. And you are doing some good work in making sure that African priorities are on the agenda of the United States, especially now as we speak. Let me also thank you for thinking about connecting the US-Africa Leaders Summit with this particular topic, because it's important for us to understand why it has to be on this agenda. For Africa and all reform-minded member states, Security Council reform has been a complicated and slow process, trapped in the interplay of divergent interests as demonstrated in the ongoing intergovernmental negotiations. In spite of over 25 years of constant reiteration of positions by UN member states, discussions on Security Council reform remain solidly frozen in the murky waters of endless, repetitive annual debates, far from the shores of concrete progress or proposals. With that in mind, it is important to outline the common African position, which encapsulates Africa's legitimate demand as articulated in the Ezulwini Consensus, with the following stand. 1, Africa's goal is to be fully represented in all the decision-making organs of the UN, particularly in the Security Council, which is the principal decision-making organ of the UN in matters relating to international peace and security. 2, full representation of Africa in the Security Council means A, not less than 2 permanent seats with all the prerogatives and privileges of permanent membership, including the right of veto. And B, 5 non-permanent seats. 3, in that regard, even though Africa is opposed in principle to the veto, it is of the view that so long as it exists, and as a matter of common justice, it should be made available to all permanent members of the Security Council. 4, the African Union should be responsible for the selection of Africa's representatives in the Security Council. And 5, the question of the criteria for the selection of African members of the Security Council should be a matter for the AU to determine, taking into consideration the representative nature and capacity of those chosen. To reiterate Africa's shared stand on the reform process, the African Union also established a committee of 10 heads of state and government, commonly referred to as C10, by the African Union with mandate to advocate and campaign for the common African position on the reform of the Council. The main objective of this committee is to unanimously, I repeat, unanimously and unequivocally canvass for broad support for the common African position in the General Assembly and, quote, build the momentum required for Africa to demand its rightful place on the global stage, end of quote. Members of the C10, for your information, include the heads of state and government of Algeria, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Kenya, Libya, Namibia, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Uganda, and Zambia. I'm very proud to note here that Sierra Leone has served consistently as coordinator of the C10. It's a huge national responsibility, but I'm confident that my country, Sierra Leone, will carry this mantle forward to its logical conclusion as soon as possible. Against this backdrop, it is logical to ask, why should UN Security Council reform be on the agenda of the US-Africa Leaders Summit? The obvious answer is simple: because it matters to Africa and the US. It matters to Africa and the US. There are other shared priorities: dealing with global health security, democracy, human rights, and the climate crisis, and so many others. But I believe that Security Council reform matters to both Africa and the US. The summit, as the Biden administration contends, will demonstrate the United States' enduring commitment to Africa and will underscore the importance of US-Africa relations and increased cooperation on shared global priorities. Perhaps more significantly, the Biden administration believes that Africa will shape the future, not just the future of the African people, but of the world. Africa will make the difference in tackling the most urgent challenges and seizing the opportunities we all face. I wholeheartedly agree with this view. Given the role of the UN Security Council in the maintenance of international peace and security, the question of African representation in the permanent category of the Council must be a priority for the US if it wants to stay true to its enduring commitment to Africa. Let me underscore that no meaningful United Nations Security Council reform will happen without the support of the US and other members of the P5, i.e. China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom. We all agree that the world has changed a lot since 1945, when the UN was formed. At the time of its formation, the victorious Allied forces shaped the architecture of the post-war international system. Africa was not at the table, nor in the room, just as it was the case during the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, when the continent was divided among European nations, and without consultation with Africans, by the way. Our continent was firmly under the yoke of colonialism and foreign domination at the end of the Second World War. Hence, African states were not actors in the emerging international system born out of the ashes of a devastating world war in which African lives were lost in the trenches of battlefields far away from home in defense of European freedom. The victorious allies, the P5, granted themselves the veto power. It reminds us of the saying that all men are born equal, but some are more equal than others. Although it was initially seen as a promoter of international stability and check against military interventions, many now see the veto as undemocratic and anachronistic, unjust and counterproductive too. Various countries outside the permanent members have proposed limitations on the use of the veto, and reform of the veto power is often included in proposals for reform in the Security Council. Today, as complex global challenges and threats emerge in the face of near paralysis of the Council to act, US support for African representation in the permanent category of the United Nations Security Council should not be framed as merely a question of sentimental justice or lip service. The fact of the matter is that Africa plays an important role in the maintenance of international peace and security, as seen in the continent's significant contribution to peacekeeping missions, which reflect greater coordination between the UN and the African Union. It should also be noted that African issues are often on the agenda of the Security Council. I can even add that Africa is more